So next talk, it's about security analysis of content curation platform based on blockchains. Speaker is Orfeas, Stefanos, Thyfronitis, Litos from University of Edinburgh. Thank you.
This is joint work with all these nice people. Also, Andrés is here if you want to ask him some questions later. This work is about content curation. So let's first define what content curation is. Content curation speaks about the process of trying to order and/or delete posts from a feed or from a forum or from a social media platform with the aim of promoting good quality content and putting the best quality content on the top of the list. There are several ways to achieve this. The simplest way to think about it would be manual content curation, where a human reads all the posts and decides which is best and which is worse and orders them in some order. But this, of course, doesn't scale and includes a whole host of other problems. So we very quickly moved on to the successful platforms really moved on to implementing automatic content curation or crowdsourced content curation, where the opinions of many people of the users of the platform are aggregated, and the users may upvote or use a star-based system and things like that. And an algorithm decides how to order the posts in some particular manner. There are several algorithms out there, and it's definitely not a trivial challenge to solve this issue. And in my opinion, in the opinion of many people, Reddit has one of the best solutions out there. And it's actually a very complex and at the same time simple solution based on statistics. It still, however, has a main drawback that the users of the platform have to trust that the web administrator will still run this algorithm and will not try to alter the results in any way. For example, an administrator of the website could, in principle, in Reddit, for example, circumvent the algorithm and promote their own posts to show a bit higher, and thus gaining an unfair advantage in favor against all the other users of the platform. So now that we have blockchains, we can actually try to do decentralized content curation, which says that we still use some nice algorithm, but the posts or something around the posts is put on the blockchain, and so even if there is a database that holds the content, there is no single entity that can actually edit the content maliciously. There's no trust towards a centralized server. The problem here is that we don't really have a very good solution, and we just can't plug and use the solution of Reddit. And this is where Steemit comes into play. Steemit is a website, a centralized website. However, it uses as a backend a blockchain, the blockchain called Steem. What Steemit is like a social media platform. I will show you a screenshot in the next slide. And it has a very large user base. Right now, the accounts are more than 1 million. And it has a particular ad hoc, a custom way to curate content. This is what if you type in steemit.com, this is what you see. It's a feed of posts ordered in a particular manner. There are some tags. We don't care about the tags in our work. And there is, as you can see, every post has a value attached to it. The value is counted in dollars. That's the decision of the developers. And for each post, a user can, I'm not the user, so I cannot do it, but if I had an account, I would actually be able to upvote posts. And if I would think that a particular post is of bad quality, I would also downvote it after being a member of the platform for long enough. And for posts that gain a lot of upvotes, they actually also gain money for the content. This is in contrast to other platforms like YouTube or Reddit, where if you're, especially in Reddit, you don't get any monetary compensation for being upvoted. But here there is actually a monetary incentive to create content. And not only that, but users who are the first to vote, or one of the first to vote for a post that eventually gets a lot of votes, they also get monetary compensation. So there's a lot of money going around in this platform. And so what happens here, when is the blockchain, the Steem blockchain touched? The blockchain is touched when a post is created and when a vote is issued for a particular post. So essentially the Steemit platform cannot say that a particular post does not exist, and they cannot fake the amount of votes the post got. So this is why the crucial parts are really decentralized. Modulo how decentralized Steem is, but that's another discussion. And so the intuition of how a vote is used is as follows. A player that has some money, when they choose to upvote a particular post, they also choose how much weight to give to that vote. The weight is between 0 and 100. In our formalization, we scaled that back from 0 to 1. And then the vote is weighted based on two numbers. The first is how much money the user has. So a richer player's voice will be heard more loudly. And this is actually an anti-Sybil mechanism to avoid having players making too many accounts. And the other way, the other scaling factor is called voting power. This is a novel approach by the Steemit developers, which the idea behind which is that each user has a bar, which is emptied when they vote gradually and is replenished as time goes by. And this prevents people from writing bots that constantly vote for every post, because there is, as we said, there is monetary incentive in voting for posts. So to avoid this attack of having people vote for every single post, there is this concept of voting power. This concept of voting power also avoids having to make people pay for voting, which would dissuade voting altogether. So these are the central concepts that are useful for us in Steemit. What we will focus on this talk on is on the ranking of posts. So as you can see, if a particular creator manages to put their post high up in the ranking, their post becomes more visible and has much more probability of gathering votes. So in order to gain money, a creator wants their post to rank very high. So there is incentive to make anything possible. The honest way is to create good posts, but maybe there are other ways that the player can use, for example, voting for themselves, to promote their posts higher up. So what we do is that we first of all define an abstract post-voting system, which could encompass a variety of different post-voting mechanisms. And then we specialize this for Steemit. And then we also define a metric for how well a list of posts is curated by a particular system. And we prove our main theorem is how well Steem curates the lists of posts that are submitted to it. And we have a complete characterization of the cases where it curates well and where it doesn't curate very well. And we also run a simulation just to verify that our findings are consistent with what would happen out there. And in the simulation case, we also focus on the malicious case, on the selfish case, where players actively try to promote their own posts. Whereas in the theorem, we just focus on the honest case, where all players just express their opinion on posts. So first, to talk about posts, how do we model posts? We do not care about the content of the posts. We just model each post as a likability vector, a vector that has as many numbers as there are players. And each number is a number between 0 and 1, which reflects how much this particular user likes the post. So if the third number is 0.75, that means that the third player likes this particular post 3/4, let's say. There is a lot of literature out there on how to model the likability, and this is the most preferred approach. And we say, then we can have a list of those posts in some particular order. And we say that the list is T-ideal if the first T posts are the same as an ideal list. And what is the ideal list? The ideal list is a list that is ordered based on having first the post that is the most liked, and second the post that is second most liked, and so on. And the total likability of a particular post is determined as the sum of the elements of the likability vector. So we don't put any weight to the opinions of people. The opinion of every person weighs the same, and we just sum up these opinions to generate a single number that corresponds to the likability, let's say aggregate likability of this particular post. And then we order the list according to these aggregate likabilities, and this is called the ideal list. This is something that cannot be achieved in a decentralized manner so easily, so the real world is not the ideal world, and so this is why we define the T-ideal in order to measure how far the real result is from the ideal result. And if let's say, as an example, a list has 100 posts and it's 100 ideal, then it is really the same as the ideal list. If it is only 50 ideal, that means that the first 50 posts are exactly the same as the first 50 posts of the ideal list, but the other 50 may be in any order. So moving on to the core, this is not exactly the core, but is a very nice part of our contribution. I like this thing a lot because it alludes a lot to the simulation-based paradigm, simulation-based security paradigm from the world of cryptography. And we model this as three different things here, as you can see. The two interesting ones are the G-feed, that's the global functionality that represents the feed of the posts, which is an ideal entity that aggregates the posts and orders them and gathers the ballots, gathers the votes from the players and handles them. And in the middle layer, we have the various players that in this model, they are just, all of them are honest and have a prescribed honest behavior. And they are activated one after the other by the environment, which does nothing but activate players, and it just orchestrates the whole thing without having any other influence on the system. And the honest players then do their thing. Why is this abstract? Why do we call it abstract? Because there are these four parameterizing procedures. These are not yet defined, and you can just take the system and define these four procedures that in order to suit your particular content curation system. And these have these particular inputs, and the first three are run by the feed, and the vote is run by the honest players. And the interaction between them is actually this. The environment would activate a player. The player would ask from the feed to read the list of posts. The feed would then reply with the current ordering of the posts. And the honest player would then maybe choose to vote some post, or maybe skip this turn. So, yes, we say that we judge the quality of a particular post-voting system by seeing under which circumstances the post list that the feed functionality holds at the end of the execution, at the end of a number of rounds, how good is the quality of this particular list of posts. And this is why we defined before the metric, the T-ideal metric. Specializing now this abstract thing for Steem means specifying the four parameterizing procedures. As you can imagine, the init procedure would just initialize and give the running parameters of the system. There are several parameters to the system into which I'm not going to go into detail. The OX describes what additional information apart from the list will the feed send to the players together with the list when they ask to read. The handle vote, which is what happens when the feed receives a vote, decides how to handle the vote, actually. And specifically for Steem, what we had to do is to actually implement this idea of voting power. And so what happens is that the vote, along with its weight, is taken into account and is further weighted by the voting power, the current voting power of the player, and the player's money. And then the voting power is updated in order to reflect the fact that the player just voted. Finally, the vote procedure, which is run by the honest players, says that the player looks at the list as just received by the feed functionality, searches through the first attention span. Attention span is a parameter, a numerical parameter of the system. And so the user searches through the first attention span posts of the list. This attempts to model the fact that users cannot skim through the entire list, but just read the first posts, and just by scrolling a bit maybe. And then votes for the best post that he can find on this chunk of the list, with a weight that is equal to the likability of the post for this particular user. And also the player may skip some turns and decide not to vote in order to not deplete their voting power. So the idea is that if there are 100 posts and 1,000 rounds, then the player will decide to vote every 10th round in order to maximize some. It's not really maximizing, but it tries to maximize a bit the usage of voting power in order to get the voice heard. This we assume, we decide that is an honest behavior that any user would like to achieve. Yes, that's all here. And let's see how this actually rolls out. The main theorem that we managed to show is that if there are players that have differing amounts, sums of money in their pockets, then we can always come up with a post list that does not achieve, that does not even one converge. That means that it does not even achieve a resulting post list of quality one ideal. And so this means that actually we have to focus only on the lists where every player has the same amount of money. And in this case, for the particular parameters, as I said, there's a bunch of parameters that define the system. For the particular parameters that Steem has decided to use, only lists that contain up to 70 posts are well curated. And when I say well curated, they are well curated from top to bottom. All posts, all up to 70 posts, are ordered exactly in the same way as the ideal list would like them to be. But if there are more than 70 posts, then we can always come up with post lists that are ordered in some particular way and have some particular likabilities, such that not even the first post is in the correct place. Here I'd like to just note that in our model, the main limitation of our model, which we'd like to fix, is that all posts are submitted at the beginning. There's no such thing as in Steem where there's a rolling submission of posts. And this is why actually the game ends, because in Steem the posts can be voted only for a particular period of time, which is, in Steem it's just a week. So since all posts are submitted at the beginning, it is only evident to assume that that the length of the game is just a set amount of rounds, which in our case is a parameter which we take to which for this result we substituted with the actual number of rounds that exist in the actual Steem platform. So moving on to the simulation, just to show that what we said is in the theorem reflects what the code says. We tried to generate some post lists. The likabilities of the posts were chosen from the uniform distribution from 0 to 1. This was kind of an arbitrary choice, but we had to decide for a distribution. And on the left, you can see the T ideal rank. It doesn't render that well, sorry for that. And because we came up with this metric, and maybe it's not the best metric in the world, we also wanted to compare it with the metrics, the established metrics of the quality of lists and how well lists compare to each other. So we compared our list with the ideal list, and as you can see, all three metrics, both ours and Spearman's Rho and Kendall's Tau, that are established measures from statistical theory, show that for a very long time, in the horizontal axis, it's the number of rounds. So this is the progression of the quality of the list. For very many rounds, the quality is very low. As you can see on the right hand, it starts increasing over 0 at the last fourth of the game, of the execution. And only in the very last rounds, the quality actually reaches a good point. And for the parameters here, we just chose exactly the parameters that are used in Steemit, and the number of posts was exactly 70, as the theorem we proved was asking for. And so yes, throughout the game, the quality of the list was bad, and it just happened almost instantly that the quality turned to be good. And this is exemplified even more in this case, where we had exactly the same parameters as before. The only difference is that the number of posts was increased from 70 to 100. And in this case, we see that the T ideal rank is topped at 4. It never exceeds 4, and at the end it even reaches less than that. And also both Spearman's Rho and Kendall's Tau never exceed 0.3. And this is a particular execution of the simulation, but no matter how many times we ran the simulation, we came up with similar results. So we didn't just pick a single execution that was in our favor. You have to take my word for that. And the last simulation that we did, and here the graphs change, is a simulation where we assumed that there are not only honest players, as we described their behavior before, but there are some players, the number which varies in the horizontal axis, who do not just say their opinion about the other posts. They just aim a particular post, their own post, and they just vote for this one, and they vote for no other post. We assumed that all selfish so-called players were a collusion, were a voting ring, as it's called in Steemit lingo. And they voted all together for a single post that they created. And we tried to handicap them as much as possible. So we put their post on the bottom, in the bottom of the list, and we put their likability, the likability of their post for every other user to 0. So no other user would like to engage with their post, and also the post would, even if they manage to see the post, which is hard because it's at the bottom of the list at the beginning, and their attention span is smaller than the size of the list, in principle. Could be as big as the list, but that doesn't change the result. The result that is really scary here is the fact that when there are exactly zero selfish players, we fall back to the previous situation. So the quality of the curation, the T ideal rank, is 100. So we tuned the parameters a bit so that the 70 number became 100, just to fit with the number 100 here because we liked it. But the core doesn't change. We played around with the Steemit parameters without changing their essence. But as soon as we added a single selfish player to the mix, we see the quality curation drop to 0. And this just, the fact that we have some artifacts here on the lower side does not show anything. Still, the curation quality is horrible. Sometimes the first post does achieve to go to the top, but this doesn't change the fact that the rest of the list usually is in total disarray. The kind of good result is the fact that it seems that that a single selfish player, when in the particular case where their post is not so such good quality, cannot tip the scales to their favor too much. As a matter of fact, the vertical axis on the second plot shows how many positions the selfish player gained. They are supposed to be at the bottom, but how much higher they were at the end of the curation process. And the horizontal axis is again the number of the voting ring players. So as we can see, the positions start to increase when the voting ring starts to become more than half of the honest players. So the voting ring has to be too big in order for the selfish player to have any advantage. And which is a good result, means that the incentives are kind of aligned. But this is a limited result only for the case where the quality of the post is really bad. Maybe the selfish players also invest some time to creating slightly better content. Maybe this approach, a mixed approach between honest and selfish, would give them much worse advantage. We don't know. We haven't tried that. So just I have to finish my talk now. The point is that we need to do more research on decentralized content curation. And Steem, it works well only in limited situations, and there are many assumptions to the quality of the curation. And there's a bunch of future work we'd like to do, and with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to me.
The ring, whereas in the second, you have to have more than half of the power to start actually seeing some quality, or to start seeing your post being, upvoted or higher on the list.
So here I can only speculate, but probably it has to do with the fact that even though the post of the malicious player is not promoted to the top, the fact that the malicious player votes at the beginning of the game for his post means that his post will be pushed very high at the very first rounds. Then gradually the honest players will just ignore it and not vote for it, so it will fall again to the bottom of the list. But this single perturbation, let's say, to the list is enough to ensure that the honest players will not have enough time, essentially, to order their list in a good order. They will have the time to push the bad post on the bottom, but in the process they will have lost precious time, which they should have used to actually curate their own list well.
This is more of a kind of clarification question. So you mentioned there's kind of a voting budget can the voters have? When they can vote on multiple posts, for each one it's going to cost them something, right?
No, that's why they have. That's actually a very nice trick that Steem came up with. The voting power concept is the one that obviates the need for putting a price tag to voting. When you vote, you don't lose any money. If that's your question, right?
Right.
You don't lose any money. What you lose is some voting power, which will be replenished if you just wait a bit.
Right.
And so when your voting power is high, that means that your vote will be strong.
Yes.
If you keep voting, voting power goes down and your vote is weaker and weaker.
Yeah.
If you don't vote ever, your voting power is full, but you waste your time.
Right. So I understand how it's replenished. My question is, when I actually use it, does it cost me in a linear way? For example, if I have this much of voting power, there is a literature in economics talking about quadratic voting. Basically, by varying how much voting power it costs, it's going to kind of better align incentives or increase efficiency. I wonder if that structure would change how, the kind of game is played here, or just take that structure as given. It's just.
So in this work, we take the particular implementation of Steem as a given. We just may change the parameters. So whenever a vote is cast, the drop in voting power is linear to the weight of the vote. So and then there is there's a parameter. There are two parameters, A and B. So if I vote with weight W, the reduction to my voting power is A, W plus B.
Okay, it's a linear class of.
Yes, it's a linear connection. I have no idea how that would change in case of another function, but I would guess that the approach that we take would still be valid in the sense that the honest players try to spread out their votes as much as possible to regenerate, but not lose time as well, and to not lose votes. Sorry.
So thank you to the speaker. So can pass to the, thank you.